Um, Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Post-Ignite event on top 5 Azure networking announcements. Please check in on today's event if you have not already done so. The check-in link is on the screen, which is aka.ms/reactor check-in, and the event ID is 14812. My name is Rav, and I'm the Program Manager at the Reactor London. You can find all our upcoming events on the Microsoft Reactor website. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We're all here to learn, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, and be kind and considerate in the way you engage. Today we have with us Joe and Dujon, both Microsoft MVPs. They both will be leading the session. We also have Salman, our student ambassador, who will also be contributing to the session. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. This lovely slide obviously has been added by our student ambassador Salman. If you have any problems in understanding what I'm saying, please go on to the device that it's for me. So I'm going to put this on. I'm going to turn on the live captions so you can obviously see what I'm saying, you can read. With that, I'm going to hand over to Joe, who is then going to lead the session.
Yep. I don't know if the slides are changing for anybody else there. I still see the welcome slide.
Oh, do you?
I think so.
It's fine for me.
Is
Fine
it?
for you?
Yeah. I'm on slide 6.
Slide 6. Okay. I don't know why it's done that for me. Let's jump here then, so at least I can see what I'm. Ah, okay, there we go. Sync the presenter. Nope.
Ah. Oh, sync. Okay, 1 second.
No, it's all right. I'll leave it like that.
Okay.
So if it's slide 6 that's up, at least I know where we are. So I suppose the title and the whole point of the Post-Ignite talk is to kind of revisit some of the components from the event. And with this being a network one, there were kind of a lot of minor updates, or a lot of maybe secondary ones, perhaps. You know, networking features within a resource type, or networking components that have been added, or whatever. But we decided we'd kind of pick the ones that got the most traction, or the ones that were most interesting, or the ones that will perhaps make the most impact for the most environments. And with it being a top 5, I suppose we have to get kind of a numbered list, but realistically we kind of chat about any of the announcements across Ignite, or the networking components as well that were talked about. So we picked these 5. I don't know if that would be in agreement with everybody else, or if anyone's had any time to try some of these out. Like Virtual Network Manager is still in preview. I know a lot of people have been asking for a service like this for quite a while, actually. But I don't know, like I said, I don't know if anyone's had a chance to try it. I myself actually haven't had a chance to deploy it. All I've done is actually gone through the functionality of it, and I had a couple of colleagues who have deployed it to see what the preview functionality or limitations, etc. are. It seems to kind of do exactly what you'd expect it to do, which is great, especially at a preview round. You know, it does give you just that single pane of glass for a network topology, right, which has kind of been missing, and is a gap perhaps, or you could probably argue was a gap in the likes of enterprise scale landing zones, where you needed something that could sit more firmly across that space. It's probably an expectation for a lot of larger companies, where you would have several, if not perhaps tens of virtual networks in an Azure footprint to have that capability. The fact that it gives both the management piece and the deployment element of it too is really, really good. There's a lot of, I don't know, from an interest perspective, there's a lot of good blogs already live from different MVPs or their community members who have looked at this and what scenarios it fits in, what it works well with, perhaps maybe what it doesn't at times. Like there are some limitations, obviously, with it being a preview, but top of the list, absolutely, because it was definitely high on the list of requests, I guess, as a functionality for Azure networking, and it definitely is one that got a lot of interest. once it was announced. I don't know if anyone has any questions on it, or if anyone has had a chance to try it yet or not. But it's definitely one I think that will become kind of key functionality or core functionality over the next couple of years, especially once it goes GA. In terms of the rest of the topics, I guess Gateway Load Balancer was another one. I'm kind of excited by this one. I think it was sort of one of those, you know, when you have an idea or you hear of a feature launched and you realize, geez, I didn't know I needed that, but I actually really do. That's kind of the way I find Gateway Load Balancer, surprised me, to be honest. So it's a SKU of the standard public load balancer, I guess, which is kind of the fairest way of putting it, or where it sort of sits logically, right? If you're familiar with those. So it's part of that whole portfolio. And the idea is to give you better performance and availability if you use third-party NVAs in an environment. So it helps with both sort of deployment of those, scale of those, and it's really just an advanced, I suppose, functionality to add into that footprint, right? If you're using NVAs without perhaps adding a significant jump in overhead for the likes of management or the operational team or whatever it might be. So it should be a good fit. Like, load balancers are already or have been around since the very, very, very early days of Azure, back when it was ASM, etc. And they've sort of grown in functionality and even commonality. Like, they're kind of ubiquitous in most environments now, to be honest. And adding this in as a functionality layer on the load balancer SKUs, I think is really clever. I think it works really well, rather than it being a completely separate or different service from that point of view. So I'm kind of excited about it. I think it's one of those ones that won't be picked up or used a lot until it comes out of preview. It's pretty difficult to find an environment that has a footprint suitable for something like that until it can be used perhaps in a GA or as part of a GA process, because if you become to depend on a piece of or an element of functionality and a proof of concept or something like that, your hands are kind of tied based on SLAs. The idea, I guess, or my sort of key part with it is, like I said, that because it's a SKU component, that integration is there, or the familiarity of how the service will work is already there. Its probes, its rules, etc., which means that out of the box there should be, I wouldn't say immediate confidence with it, but at least an element of familiarity if you already use the other load balancing services. If we look at then, I don't know if anyone again has had any chance to try it or use it or has any questions on it, etc. I kind of it's very high level kind of overview of what it is without getting too specific relative to NVA scenarios for it or any element of sort of hub spoke design with those firewalling components either. Okay. I suppose next up we've Bastion. Yeah. So Bastion obviously has been around for quite a while. If anyone has heard, seen, or used it, it didn't have really a SKU option, right? It was just one, or didn't have multiple SKU options. It was just a single tier, which facilitated RDP or SSH connectivity to virtual machines once the service was enabled within your virtual network. I really, really like Bastion. I use it a lot in client environments, my own environments. Sorry, just getting a drink. If I have virtual machines that I don't need a layer of public connectivity to, but I do need an administrative layer on. So it's great for just that quick, simple access without having the concerns associated with anything else that was perhaps either requires a huge level of cost or administration or whatever it may be. Bastion really fills a nice gap there. The new SKU, which is the standard SKU, improves on that, which adds, right, the ability to support the scale, or sorry, to support more scale of your Bastion instance. So for example, one of the key features they added originally with Bastion was the ability to use it across peered virtual networks, right? Originally, you would have had to have a Bastion per VNet. that was sort of flagged as a bit of a non-suitable design choice, because who needs multiple bastions? The idea would be connect once and use that wherever you need it. This kind of builds on top of that to a degree, because if you now have a single bastion, you now could run into scale issue depending on the size of the environment you're trying to support, or the amount of people who have to make use of the service. You know, be the large administrative or operations team or whatever it might be. So this can now scale up to, I think, 50 instances or something crazy like that. Yeah. Okay. So it's that's a lot when you think about the amount that it can then support in terms of concurrent sessions. It's still SSH and RDP, but that just gives those larger footprints that simplicity that they would have wanted, rather than having to say deploy to, do you connect by this bastion or that bastion? Do you get permissions on this one or that one? So it simplifies the whole process across the board. Adding scaling is very, very handy as a solution there as part of that process. And the second then element of that is the I think is the admin panel component, which wasn't necessarily I suppose, or sorry, the admin panel is how you can change. Sorry. Getting confused in terms of what the configuration element of it was. So the overall side of it, I guess, in terms of the standard SKU, it's just one of those improvements that allows for, I guess, what you'd call a production or an enterprise scale network connectivity model. So while it's not perhaps the most exciting announcement, I think it's actually probably going to be the one that's used the most by a mile. It's GA straight away as well, which is great. I think, is that still saying network function manager? For everybody else, is that what number 4 is for everyone else? Network function manager? Yes. Okay. I had changed that actually, sorry. So what I had flipped it around to was the new experiences network insights. So originally I had network function manager, which is really interesting service. I don't know if anyone's actually looked at it or not yet, but it's extending Azure management for the 5G and SD-WAN edge devices. And I kind of was thinking to myself, a reactor event, I don't know how suitable or tangible a service like this is for a lot of people, but it's basically a consistent management experience on mobile networks, right? Which means that you have the ability to kind of enable somewhat seamless sort of LTE or 5G solutions. So it's kind of like a little bit out of my comfort zone as well, if I'm honest, in terms of that side of the Azure Edge management component when it comes to networking. A bit niche when it comes to the deployment side of it too, as in this isn't something a lot of companies are going to make use of. This is something that specific industries require based on perhaps how they're using Azure Stack Edge or IoT Hub or something like that. What I changed it to, because I thought maybe it would be more appropriate, was the new experiences that have been added for network insights. So the one thing is great with networks, or one thing that is perhaps frustrating, depending on what way you look at it, is the ability to troubleshoot them. So if you have, say, VPN connectivity or Azure Firewall or whatever, there's a current method or a method maybe you're now familiar with in terms of troubleshooting, and as part of its integration to Azure Monitor. Thankfully, or happily, there's a GA release as part of Ignite for increased, I suppose, functionality, increased data and ability to troubleshoot components as part of the network insights feature, which gives you sort of, I guess, richer insights or better insights into the overall network footprint, which is great. And one of the key bits, or the piece that I really, really liked, was the fact that it includes a workbook that's sort of pre-configured for you. So from the point of view of effort to use this service, it's greatly reduced, right? Because I know that's been a challenge. I know, say, for example, Azure Firewall and its integration with log analytics, if you look at some of the example queries, you know, they're 30, 40 lines long, and a lot of people find the learning curve when it comes to being able to troubleshoot a service like that a little bit steep. This is a great sort of direction forward with that, in terms to how you can functionally troubleshoot the likes of VPN gateways or Azure Firewall, you know, the common resources that you make use of, that if there is an issue with, can really, really impact your environment, if not sort of take it out of production use. So that sort of press forward is great. The other thing that I liked from it that is perhaps even a little bit simpler, again, is as part of the Network Insights feature, you're actually able to click through to links that will help. I know that sounds kind of, because you not always do that, but it's not always the case sometimes. You know, you could get an error that says, this is basically the detail, or this is what's involved, or whatever. You need to go off and search for that. Sometimes you get an AKA link, but as part of this update, they're actually giving you direct links across, which is great from that point of view, because from a time perspective, you know, you've got the people who understand the product saying, here's a link to help if you hit this error, which again just reduces that sort of time to troubleshoot, increases knowledge transfer, I guess, from the product team to end users. And that's, I just think, a really positive step. Like I said, really simple, but from a standpoint of if you're running into an issue with one of these services and you're looking at Network Insights to try to figure out what's going wrong, any help I think is appreciated across the board, realistically, to you know, resolve things faster, or at least perhaps help you understand something better as well. If you're kind of in an RCA scenario, you know, you have a client or your own environment trying to figure out what went wrong now that you're fixed. Anything like this can really help from that point of view too. So again, just one of those that I thought was more perhaps appropriate to more people, or more relevant to more people, and very useful. And again, GA straight away, so we have no concerns with preview features or anything like that. And then last, maybe not as relevant to everybody, but I think important from the point of view of a lot of production environments in Azure, are the new Express Route features that were announced. So there's a couple of these, but I think FastPath is probably the one that for those on the higher SKUs, so the 1 gig plus SKUs, you know, that's the one where people are going to really sort of see a difference. So FastPath improves the data path performance between on-prem and Azure Virtual Networks, and it supports, or I suppose the announcement is that it supports more scenarios, and the big one is peering, right? So that's the big sort of key feature announcement here for FastPath, which is great. So basically, more performance, more connectivity options, a feature that has been sort of, I wouldn't say waited on, but been asked for, right, from that point of view. The other big one, and this probably applies to those who are leaning a bit towards, or a bit more towards, sort of future-facing networking components, or those that are on sort of slightly larger customer footprints, or maybe just those that have sort of an interest in it, I guess. Maybe IPv6 support is there for private peering now, which means that you have a completely different method of expansion depending on what your requirements are. Obviously, IPv4 exhaustion is something that is, or sort of, I don't know, I've heard people call it end of life. It's definitely not that. Exhaustion, I think, is the fairest comment for it, but it's obviously something that is coming. It's something that is on a lot of, let's call it network radars. From that point of view, I think adding functionality like this now really helps people adopt, rather than sort of panic and sort of reactively try to put something in place, you know, when they have an issue, excuse me. So more IPv6 support across the board in Azure, I think, is really important, especially for any clients that are using really high scale services like, I don't know, IoT or something, you know, where you could have essentially unlimited devices coming online at any one time, and you're trying to allocate or figure out how you're going to work. Networking from that perspective on IPv4 is just not really suitable for that technology. So adding this in as part of that process, I think, has a huge benefit from that point of view. In terms of the use cases, or, you know, if there's, I suppose, a scenario where you could go off and test that, probably looking at lab maybe to work your way through it. It could be pretty tricky to bring something like that into prod, so just be a little bit cautious with that one. The other one that I like as well, and again, this is just sort of help with a management side of things from ExpressRoute, is the introduction of private peering support, or BGP community support on private peering. Excuse me, got that backwards. For anyone who doesn't understand or isn't super familiar with that, the BGP community basically is group of values, right, when it comes to address ranges, and being able to advertise those over private peering, even though now it's in public preview, is really helpful from a administrative perspective, which means that you can actually now start to apply the likes of route filters to control that traffic, either manipulate it slightly better or just keep things slightly cleaner for those environments, clients, customers, etc., that have large scale environments. The likes of BGP overload or overhead can start to impact performance. It's not rare, but it's also not common for smaller footprints. So it's something that will help alleviate that. It's something that will help with sort of management and governance of routes, something that'll help you really long-term understand how your routing is working, etc., across the board as well. And in combination, I think all of those features really separate ExpressRoute a little bit further from the pack when it comes to best-in-class production connectivity model for Azure. So I suppose wrapped into one, I think it's a really sort of good announcement set for ExpressRoute as a product too. So I'm kind of excited about that one to dig my teeth into it more as well. And again, sort of a lab deployment, I guess, to begin with, because a bit of a challenge on some of those straight out of the box in prod, and obviously as well because the rest of them are all public preview, fast path BGP pairings as well. So so that's our kind of our top 5. I don't know if anybody has any other questions relative to any of the other announcements. If there's any questions on any of those 5, anything else on Azure networking or anything along those lines, please feel free. I'm sort of conscious I've just talked for 20 minutes, so stay quiet for a minute or two.
I think the Azure Bastion one was quite interesting because I believe I saw some integration bits with Azure Monitor in terms of the scaling, in terms of monitoring some of the resources like the CPU, memory, and network traffic, and those kind of things. So that looks quite interesting out of all the ones that I've seen specifically as well, especially with the scaling of the virtual machines, I think going up to about 50. So yeah, because I do quite a bit of stuff with the Azure Monitor side, so that's definitely pretty interesting to me. And I think the gateway load balancers also, I think, will be quite interesting as well, because I've worked with a couple of clients where I helped them sort of migrate purely into Azure, and I know that I've heard them speak about this as an announcement as well, but I think they're more specific, I think more around the firewall side and load balancing of that side. But yeah, I think those two are the most interesting that I've seen.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think that Bastion one, like I said, with it being GA straight away, I think it just sort of unlocks a scenario for a lot of customers who perhaps were struggling with scale on that service. And as you said yourself, any integration or any further deeper integration with Azure Monitor, I think that's welcomed across all services, right? Like that's I don't think you can never complain about having too much data, right?
Yeah.
Unless maybe perhaps the cost of storing it, right? But you'll never complain about having too many logs, especially on a service that provides connectivity. So having them there or having that deeper integration, I think, is really, really helpful. And yeah, gateway load balancer, I guess I suppose it's some people, like I said, it was an announcement that I kind of looked at and went, do you know what? I actually didn't realize I needed that. But now that I've kind of gone through the purpose of it and some of the, I guess, the scenarios or the concepts relative to it, I kind of went, oh, okay, I know exactly where I could use that. Or I know how I could use that as part of an environment now as a design concept, which is really helpful, because sometimes you kind of, we all make design decisions around the solution perhaps where you're making the best with what you have. It's rare in Azure at this point, that you kind of have to compensate or you have to do something along those lines for services, but it does happen, depending on maybe a client requirement. Any service like this that facilitates greater integration across the board, again, using a service that we all know and use a lot, like load balancer, I think it just really helps. And anything, I suppose, too, that has a focus on security, which this is a sort of secondary layer to facilitating that, I think is important at the moment as well. Security is probably, as it normally should be, it's high on everyone's list. I think it's separate in terms of the gap that it's created between itself and second, whatever that may be for you, whether it's cost or performance. I think that's extended. It's almost first and then fifth now instead of like we have a second, third, or fourth at the moment. Security is really top. So anything I think that helps make more deployment scenarios possible or make deployment scenarios simpler for customers, and gateway load balancer absolutely sits in that space. I think it has a huge benefit once it goes again, GA, I guess, but even in the preview functionality, it's pretty high. I was surprised in terms of what's there. Sometimes preview features are, it can do 4 or 5 components of perhaps a functionality set of 10. Gateway load balancer is pretty much good to go, I think, looking at its functionality in preview. So really, really be interesting to see how widely adopted it is on prod environments once it goes live.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any other questions or anything from anyone, Ravni, or actually there was chat, was it? Or was it you guys posting links for people? No, it was Salman. Oh,
Yeah.
handy.
We don't have any questions as such,
Cool.
but obviously Salman's been very kind and posting all the links into the chat.
Yeah, thanks. Salman just digesting my my waffle into handy links. Thanks, mate.
Well, thanks for the discussion. It's really interesting. One thing I was kind of unsure about from the pricing for Bastion was the additional hour for standard. It goes from, I think, 29 cents for standard, and then an additional hour is then like about half the price. So I'm not sure what that is referring to.
Well, with it being GA, sometimes what you see is like there's confusion on the pricing element of it based on, say, in preview they might cut the rate but tell you what the actual rate is. So sometimes it's a combo price, but the additional standard hour I think is based around the scale units. So you have a set rate for the base pricing for standard, and I think the base pricing comes in at sort of 2 units, which is generally where it would sit. So you've got an available sort of set. And then I think the additional standard hour is as it scales, that's the price as you move up. So you're not just going to keep, say if the standard rate is, I don't know, €1 or £1 a day to make things simple, and you've got 2 units. If you double that, you're not going to pay £2 a day. You would pay a slightly less sort of amount for an increase in scale. I think that's basically what it facilitates as part of that process. So it's to give you an indication of what the scale would be, rather than basically just keep doubling it, I guess, from that point of view.
Okay, interesting. So instead of, yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit more palatable, right? Because you say, oh, we've got scale, and you go, great, but scale means we've got reactive cost then as well. So
yeah,
you have to be a little bit cautious with it, perhaps. Like I know people are terrified of it on something like a like application gateway, right, which has a set run rate per instance, and if you allow it to automatically scale, it can sort of get expensive, right? If you have that sort of traffic, a lot of people set either I suppose call it an array of sizes that are possible, or they would set it to manual, and basically just set alerts then, and they'll proactively scale it rather than letting the system automatically react to scale requirements. It's kind of a crossover of best case scenario realistically, but yeah, with this one at least it's not linear unit pricing. I think makes it, like I said, a little bit more palatable for those larger scale environments, especially if you had to facilitate your scale requirements with, say, 2 Bastion components, or 3 or 4 or whatever to meet your requirements for connectivity. Now you can cut back to a single Bastion instance with scaling. You should, I would guess, as a result, possibly get a better overall price for that, because you've got a single instance with scale pricing rather than multiple instances. Because obviously one of the clever parts of scaling is it'll scale back in. It's not just scale out. So you would hope your prices have that capability, or peaks and troughs relative to usage, and hopefully the troughs outweigh the peaks and your cost balances out and comes in less than your multiple instances prior to that. So yeah, as far as I can tell, or as far as I understand it all, that's the difference in the pricing, or the explanation, I guess, of the pricing tiers for how that Bastion standard SKU will work.
Well, yeah, thanks. That makes sense.
We have about 5 minutes left, but obviously if no one has any questions, please feel free to wrap up if you'd like.
Yeah, I kind of think that's it, right? In terms of topics, etc. So I suppose thank you very much for me, for everyone who joined and listened to me chat. Thanks to the guys and thanks Ragney for hosting.
No problem. Thank you very much for joining in. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Dujon. Thanks, Salman. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank you.
everything, everyone.
Thanks all. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Yeah, have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.